from the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. So how is this news being received there where you are?
Well, Sami, according to the state news agency citing Iraqi officials, they say that these evacuation procedures by the CENTCOM, the US CENTCOM, does not relate only to Iraq, but to other countries in the Middle East where there are US military facilities and other diplomatic missions. They also say that there are no indications, according to Iraqi officials cited by the state news agency, there are no indicators of any threats to justify these evacuation procedures. They also go on to elaborate that the security situation in Iraq, all diplomatic missions, including the US, are enjoying the safe situation in Iraq. This is on the official level. But on another layer, as you know, Sami, that here in Iraq, the biggest Iranian allies, the armored groups, multiple armored groups operating on their own, and they take commands directly from Tehran. And as you know, these procedures have been triggered after the Iranian threats to U.S. interests in the region, and also after the U.S. President Donald Trump's negative comments about the nuclear negotiations. We know that U.S. interests in the region have been attacked hundreds of times over the past 2 years by Iraqi armored groups who are affiliated to Iran.
All right, Mahmoud Abdelwahed there from Baghdad. Joining us live from Washington, D.C. is Caroline Rose. She's Director of Strategic Blind Spots at the New Lines Institute, a global stability think tank. Good to have you with us. So first of all, connect the dots for us. What does a withdrawal of military dependence tell us?
Certainly, and thank you so much for having me on. I think ultimately what this signals is the United States is anticipating Iran making good on recent threats to strike U.S. military installations and to try and add pressure on a U.S. drawdown effort. Something that is, of course, already taking place in the Middle East. There's a timetable for withdrawal in both Iraq and Syria by the end of 2026. I also think we've been here before. We've seen tit-for-tat strikes between the United States, Iran, and Iran-backed proxies in Iraq and elsewhere across the region before. And we've also seen the United States, specifically the first Trump administration, authorize the evacuation of non-essential personnel and dependents at many of these facilities. So I think that we're just seeing this war of words ensue between the United States and Iran. And this is a cautious measure that the Trump administration is making with its knowledge of what Iran's capabilities are in the region. We've seen some very close calls before with many of these strikes.
But is it does it indicate that the US really thinks a military confrontation is now close, or should we read it as maybe more sort of posturing to put pressure on Iran during talks?
I think it absolutely has to do with posturing. I also think it's also a way of the Trump administration trying to achieve a secondary objective in the region, which is the actual withdrawal of U.S. forces stationed in both Iraq and Syria. Just last week, we saw the United States announce that it is withdrawn an additional 500 forces stationed in northeast Syria and is looking to consolidate from 3 bases to 1 base. So I think that it's also important to keep in mind that we're seeing this withdrawal process already happen, and this is another measure that they could take to achieve this. Now, when it comes to Iran and the negotiation process there, I think that this is certainly a way of the Trump trying to signal publicly that they are engaged, and by evacuating non-essential military personnel, it not only says and states publicly that the United States expects Iran to strike, But it also indicates that the United States could also strike and is willing to engage in a barrage of attacks between Iran directly or Hashid al-Shaabi militias stationed in Iraq or Houthi militants stationed in the region. So I think that it is a warning shot that is sending out the message of we're ready to engage and we're going to essentially evacuate any non-military personnel that's stationed at these locations.
Okay, now while this is going on, we've got the IAEA meeting to decide on Iranian compliance. Are we getting, do you think, into a cycle? I mean, the expectation is that the IAEA is going to say Iran is not complying. Does that take us into perhaps a cycle, a series of events where Iran then withdraws from the NPT with all the consequences that could bring?
Certainly. I think that if there is that vote of non-compliance and the censorship, I think that very much Iran will withdraw. And as a result, we will likely see this as the nail in the coffin for U.S.-Iran negotiations that were already souring to begin with. But I think that this very much is going to provide the justification to skeptics within the Trump administration over the talks. And essentially, they will rule out any future engagement with Iran. I think that ultimately this is going to end that process. And we very well might see escalation, at least limited escalation between U.S. militants on the ground in the Middle East and Iran, or Iran empowering its proxy networks in the region to try and strike U.S. interests and U.S. partners.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Caroline Rose, for joining us on this show from the Strategic Blind Spots New Lines Institute.